Hi, my name is Stephen Crane, and I am the town manager in Longmeadow, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Chairs and Chairs. With me today is Carolyn Reed from the Longmeadow Board of Assessors. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Really great to have you here today.
Nice to be here.
And what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit is how our properties are valued in our community, both individually and collectively, what that valuation means for our tax rate and our tax bills, if you will,
Okay.
and a few other items of importance for the Board of Assessors. But first, I'd like to ask you to tell me a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in the Board of Assessors? What background got you interested in serving on that board, and anything else you want to share?
Okay. I've been on the Board of Assessors since 2013, and prior to that, I worked in the assessing field since 2007, so it was kind of a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And as a profession, I am currently serving as the principal assessor in another community, and I am a Massachusetts accredited assessor.
Wow.
So, I think some people don't realize that assessors, that people that serve on the Board of Assessors need to be certified by the state. I think it's one of the only boards where you need to be certified, so there's training that needs to happen for anybody. I think it's within 2 years of your appointment that you need to earn this certification that's awarded by the state.
Wow. How many people are on our Board of Assessors?
We have three members that serve on the board.
Right.
Yep.
How much time do the three of you spend on it, generally?
It varies. I would say on average, we probably hold meetings once a month. This time of the year, I would say from late fall through early spring is kind of our busier time when we're going through the tax rate setting process and getting our values certified by the state. And then we kind of roll right into property abatement season. So that's really when the board is meeting more frequently, and but generally speaking, probably once or maybe twice a month during abatement season.
Right. We folks at home may not know, but we have our principal assessor here in Longmeadow is a contracted service. There's a company who does valuations and collects a lot of data, and they are also certified as a principal assessor. And so we looked at that as an opportunity to maybe save a little of the budget by having it on a contracted basis versus a full-time employee. The only reason we were able to do that is because we have such great competence at the Board of Assessors.
Thank you.
So the board was really supportive of making that change, and we did it kind of on a trial basis at first.
Yeah.
And it seems to have worked out. I think we went through some hiccups that we've reported at the select board level, but I don't know how the general public, if they were well informed at it, but really software glitches that really delayed the tax rate setting process.
Right, this time.
And so it was somewhat of it was a crisis on a small scale in the world of the Board of Assessors. But the board, the staff, the full-time staff we do have up in the assessor's office, and our contractor assessor really, I think, got us through it well, working with the Department of Revenue.
Right, yeah. I think Jessica and Ken Rogers from KRT worked really well together to kind of get through those bumps and hiccups and push through and persevere and got things to move forward and got the approval that we needed
From the state.
From the state to move into the classification hearing and get the tax rate set.
So the end of the process, in many ways, is the state approves the valuation, and then the very end is the select board sets the tax rate.
Right.
Not using this year as an example because it did get a little topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
Take me through the normal valuation process that the Board of Assessors would go through that would then get submitted to the Department of Revenue and then to the Select Board.
Sure. So every year, the assessors are charged with looking at qualified sales in comparison to our assessment data. So we need to fall within certain ranges and percentages statistically in order to get our values approved by the state.
What's a qualified sale?
A qualified sale is what we consider an arm's length transaction. So it was on MLS, was open to the general market.
Of property sales.
Of property sales. There was no factors that, like a foreclosure or sale between relatives, we would not consider a qualified sale because there's some other factors there that are influencing the sale price or could potentially influence the sale price. So we would only be looking at those sales that we consider arm's length or qualified sales in order to match to our assessment data. So we do that on an annual basis.
Is that for both residential and commercial?
Correct, yep, residential and commercial. Every 5th year now, it used to be every 3 years, but now it's every 5th year, we are in what we call certification. So in addition to our normal process of looking at all of the sales and matching it with our assessment data, the Department of Revenue comes in and it's a little more intensive. The reviewing, the reporting, they're looking at things many different ways as opposed, they want us to break down the data by different price ranges, by styles of homes, by many different factors as opposed to just a smaller, on a smaller scale. So that's what we were in this year. So there's more hoops to jump through in order to get our values certified by the state.
So this year, like you said, it was one of the 5-year processes that involved a little more detailed
Right.
data collection. What normally is, how does that have any impact on the valuation that you've observed?
Well, it doesn't. Being in certification doesn't necessarily impact the value, although we did see an increase this year in the valuations, mostly due to the market conditions. So, and then again, with the commercial properties, a lot of times you're seeing maybe an increase or a change on the certification years because you're not necessarily reviewing that level of detail on the commercial properties every year, and due to the length of their lease terms, you don't see that as many sales, and you don't see as frequent as a change in the valuations for the commercial properties. So a lot of times on the certification year, you will see a change on the commercial properties because we're looking at, we're valuing those commercial properties multiple different ways. So in addition to sales, we would use other methods, an income approach, what income does that property or could it potentially generate, and a cost approach, what would it cost to build that building structure, and depreciate it based on the age of it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I've heard the comment made that because there aren't a lot of commercial sales, not only in the community but in the area, that we may be undervaluing commercial property. But I know from working with the board that there is a lot more detail and a lot of other methodologies that get applied to commercial properties.
Right, that's right. Yeah, I mean, you hear that on the residential, side as well. I mean, you can hear it, both ways, I guess. But I guess one thing or one question that people often ask, if assessment is as of a point in time. It's just like the stock market. It changes every day. It fluctuates every day. So for valuation purposes and assessment purposes, for example, we're in fiscal 19 right now. So the assessment date is January 1st of 2018. So we're looking at sales that took place in calendar year 2017. So it's, a somewhat...
It's a look back.
It's a look back, exactly, at what was happening during that time period. And then, as the market's kind of increasing at this point. So, somebody might say, well, the assessment, my house house next door to me sold for $350, and you've got the neighbors assessed at $300,000. But we have to remember that we were looking back. If it's a sale that just took place, we'll look at that sale if it's a qualified sale, but moving forward into fiscal 20 or 21, depending on the time frame.
So, and this is one of those things where I think sometimes people don't always realize that the assessment is based on, it's not an appraisal, like you would get an appraisal for your mortgage or for a refinance or something like that, but it is based on sales data.
Correct.
And so I think many people saw an increase in their property valuation. I know I did, and that therefore led to an increase in tax in my property taxes.
Right.
Part of that was due to decisions made by the voters of the community both on the annual budget and on some of our capital projects, especially the new DPW facility. That
Right.
debt exclusion is now on the property tax bill. So I know people did see somewhat of a jump in their bills, but I also know from talking to local realtors that the market for homes, especially in a kind of mid-range price range, we'll call it the $300,000 to $500,000 range, is very
Right.
strong,
Right.
driving a lot of that increase. So it's kind of like a good news, bad news for homeowners. That the good news is
Right.
your value, your property is, according to the data, more valuable, but then your
Right.
bill's also going to be higher. So one of the things that's been talked about when the evaluation gets sent to DOR, Department of Revenue, the state signs off on it, and then that gets presented by the Board of Assessors to the Select Board, who then sets the tax rate.
Correct. Yep.
And what I think some people don't realize is that the tax rate is your levy, what you're gonna spend essentially, or rate you're gonna raise in a given year off of taxation,
Yep.
divided by the overall value of all of the properties in the town combined.
Right.
So the rate is really a derivative number.
Right.
One of the things that gets talked about in that public hearing is a split tax rate. And I think a few years ago, the Select Board did do a split tax rate for 1 year, but I know the Board of Assessors has always been pretty clear in their feedback to the board about that. And we don't have a split tax rate, and I don't know if you wanted to just give me a couple of quick points about why that is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a couple of things. I guess, just to one of the points you were making about the sales, we get that question a lot. Well, no house on my street has sold, so therefore, how can you raise my assessment? In the absence of sales, the assessors are still, we're on a mass appraisal system. So even though a house on your particular street maybe didn't sell, we're still globally looking at the town and all of the qualified sales and making adjustments as warranted. One of the charges of the Board of Assessors is the classification hearing. So basically appearing before or with the Select Board and presenting information relative to the town valuation and therefore what the tax rate would be at a single or split rate, and then it's up to the Select Board to make the determination. Do they want to adopt a factor of 1 or a single rate or split the rate? Like you said, it doesn't increase the amount of dollars that the town can collect. It just shifts where the collection is coming from. Now in Long Meadow, we have, I believe it's 94% residential, percentage of residential properties. So when we're appearing before the Select Board at the classification hearing, a lot of the conversation is around when you're shifting or trying to shift the rate, you're not providing a lot of benefit to the residential side, but you are impacting the commercial side significantly. And it's because of the nature of the makeup of the town that there is a lot smaller percentage of commercial properties than residential. You typically will see maybe a town, or city or town entertaining a split rate more seriously when it's more like 80-20. I think you maybe see the benefits. There's a lot larger commercial base that can absorb that with not as significant as an impact.
I think just to shorthand that a little bit, if it's, a resident may save $1, but a commercial property will have to pay $20 more.
Right.
And I think one of the things that the business community has always articulated, especially in a community like Long Meadow where it's mostly local service businesses,
Right.
that ultimately gets passed through to customers anyway. And there are
I
many
would
business
definitely.
owners who live in the community, and most of that, like I said, the higher taxes get passed directly to the shop owners, if you will, not the,
Right, the consumers end up
Yeah, the consumers end up paying
ultimately
it.
picking up the difference.
So as I mentioned, my house went up in value. And say, hypothetically speaking, of course, I decided that you guys have it wrong. What
Gotcha.
avenues do I have to appeal the value of my home?
Sure, everybody has the right to appeal. And the time period for filing an abatement is when you get the third quarter tax bill, which is the one that goes out at the end of December. It's
Which would be the one that everyone just received.
Correct. Yep, the one that they just received, because that one is the one that has your assessment on it, and it has the tax rate on it. So you now have an assessment on there. If you look back at the first 2 quarters, the assessment isn't listed on there. Those are preliminary bills. We haven't gone through the process with the state yet, set the values. So that's why you have to wait until you get that third quarter bill with the assessment. There's an abatement application that needs to be completed and submitted to the Board of Assessors office by February 1st. So you have from the time that you receive that third quarter bill, which is generally by January 1st, you have until the due date of that bill, which is February 1st. So there's like I said, an application. You can supply any supporting.
Where could I get the application?
It's online at the Board of Assessors, on the Board of Assessors page on the town website. You can go into the office. I believe you can also get it right at the Department of Revenue site as well.
The Board of Assessors is at Town Hall at 20 William Street for those who...
Second floor.
Second floor, yeah.
Yep. So they would just complete that application, supply any supporting documentation. Some people will cite sales on their street or in their neighborhood as to why they feel it's overvalued. They might point to a similar property to theirs that may be assessed a little bit differently. They may have had an appraisal done. Really, you could supply whatever information that you want to along to support your claim that you believe that your assessment's too high. And the board has 90 days to look at, so in our meetings, we would take all of that, look at all of the applications that come in, and discuss them and make a decision. And within 90 days, the person would get a response back from the board.
Are there any other kind of abatements that the board considers besides property taxes?
That we do. We have, personal exemptions, I guess, is another form of tax relief. Those are offered to people, veterans who are disabled, at least 10% disabled, as qualified by the Veterans Association. For those who are legally blind, and elderly persons over the age of 70 who are of limited means. So they would need to meet an income and asset qualification in order to be eligible for that particular program.
Great. So the overall evaluation process, there's also something called a measure and list, which is every 10 years, I believe. And I think we just went through one of those fairly recently as well.
Yeah, we did.
So talk to me about that.
Measure and list, the Department of Revenue, basically we have vision appraisal software system where we maintain all of the data on all of the properties in town. So anytime somebody takes out a building permit, for example, we would get that information from the building department, update our system, go out, inspect the property, update our system. And say with the measure and list, that is a way to verify the data that we have in our system is accurate and up to date. So once every 9 years, the state says you need to make an attempt to get in, verify the data on the properties in town just to make sure everything is accurate, because that's how you're determining or coming up with the valuation for the property. So you want to make sure that your data is as accurate as possible. The Board of Assessors, we used to do this as a project, do all the properties, at the same time, or within a year or two time frame. And I believe now that we've moved to contract consulting, we're going to do it on an annual basis. So we're going to break up the town into sections and do it over a 5-year period. So we're ongoing, we're reviewing the data on an ongoing basis as opposed to once every 9 years. So it will be more routine. That will be inspecting the properties.
The other good thing is that obviously we have to hire someone to do the measure unless we don't have the in-house capacity.
Right.
And from a budgetary standpoint, it makes it so that 9th year, the assessing department budget is significantly higher because of this. Whereas if you break it up into smaller pieces, it levels out that budget impact.
Yeah, that's right.
So what else can you tell me about the Board of Assessors?
I'm not sure what else I can tell you about the Board of Assessors. We've the 3 members that are on the board. I think we've all been on there since at least 2000 and I think Larry's probably the newest one. You know, I think we work well together. We take the responsibilities of serving on the board seriously. I mean, it has to do with, you know, and honestly, I think it's a good thing when people question their values, because for me, I mean, I would do the same thing. You know, if I didn't have the understanding or knowledge that I had, you know, if my assessment went up in what I thought was significantly, I would maybe ask the question. And I can appreciate somebody asking the question, trying to get a better understanding of how the process works, and if they do feel like they want to appeal it, you know, take it through the proper channels. I mean, another thing that, you know, people might make the assumption that if the tax rate goes down, that means my tax rate goes down, the tax dollars would also go down. That's not always the case. I always tell people it almost, you know, tax rate goes up, you know, like you said before, it's the levy over the valuation. You get the tax rate, but the town is going to spend more money next year than they did this year, generally speaking.
Even if we do nothing different.
So your tax dollars are going to go up. If your assessment goes up, down, tax rate goes up, down, the dollars that you pay are generally going to be higher next year than they are this year.
And I think that we've talked locally about our tax ceiling, which is a part of Proposition 2.5. It's a part of state law, where you can't have a tax rate higher than $25 per thousand, not including excludable debt. So when we do people call them override votes, they're not really overrides, they're debt exclusions, like for the DPW or the senior center.
Right.
Not including those, it can't be any higher. So if your operating budget has to be supported by less than $25 per thousand, and right now we're 23 and change, I believe.
Right.
The higher valuations have helped, but we're projected to hit that levy ceiling in 5 or 6 years. So we're planning for that now, and I think the point you make is a really a critical one, and that is having as the denominator the cumulative values in our community. It's really important to have that be an accurate number and have it be reflective of good data, because that drives the tax rate, and we really have very little margin to spare on our tax rate. And so I am greatly appreciative of the work of the Board of Assessors collectively and you individually.
Thank
you. And I do know that the 3 of you take it very seriously. I know that you spend, for a volunteer, you spend an awful lot of time doing it, and we are really grateful for that. And like I said, it's an essential role in helping maintain our ability to levy and, quite frankly, keep the quality of life in Long Meadow and maintain our services. That's the top number is what we assess, what we levy on against people to be able to maintain that, all of the great services, our schools, our public safety, our public works department, our senior center, all of these things that cost a lot of money, but also cost more money every year. Most of the cost increases are usually beyond our control.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to make sure that we run a tight ship when it comes to valuation, and the board definitely does that very, very well. And so we thank you for that.
Thank you.
Listen, thank you so much, Carolyn. And I will say, for the folks at home, I'm also pleased to call Carolyn my friend. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to come in and gave us the time here at Chairs and Chairs.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Carolyn.
This is very exciting. Thanks.